Well, good day again. Welcome to another session as we continue our journey looking at basic principles in sports and exercise psychology. Today, we're going to talk about a topic in sports psychology, and that's the issue of psychological skills training, or sometimes known as mental skills training. As always, we just start off with a list of learning objectives for you all doing this as a formal course. So, why do we need psychological skills training? Well, if you've spent any time around sports, if you have been listening to some of these other videos, you will know that athletes are challenged by many things. For example, as you can see, you might lose a game you think you should have won, and that might leave you disgusted and frustrated. You might have high levels of anxiety at a certain point in a competition, and that results in you choking or traditionally failing to perform as you want. You might have an injury, and recovery from that injury might be frustrating you and making you feel depressed. For some reason, you may lack motivation and don't want to train. You might find that you have difficulty concentrating during a match or during a game. Your mind wanders and you lose focus. All of these are myriad examples of why you may need to develop skills to regulate your mind and how you align yourself for best performance. And if you've ever played sports or been involved in athletic competition, you will know that these are not unusual circumstances, but these are actually very, very common. And often there's a lot of research emerging that the difference between the persons who perform well and those who don't perform so well is their ability to master some of these things and to get through these difficult circumstances. So, what then is psychological skills training? Well, a simple definition is it's the systematic and consistent practice of mental or psychological skills. And the reason we're practicing these skills is for the purpose of enhancing performance, increasing enjoyment, or achieving a greater level of self-satisfaction. Now, the big thing to note about this is psychological skills training is training. And the best analogy, of course, to think about, as you can see in the diagram, is to equate it to natural training or physical training. And all the same principles of physical training will apply to psychological skills training. So for example, if you're lifting weights and you need to lift a heavy weight, you know that if you just do that once a week or twice a month, you're not going to see any improvement in your ability to lift those weights. In order for your training to be successful, you have to be specific and consistent. You have to be consistent over a long period of time. The same thing will apply to psychological skills training. The other thing is if you want to lift a weight with your arms, as you can see that brain lifting that weight, you have to train your arms. You can't be training your legs and primarily then expect to be able to do a biceps curl with any great increase in strength. So your training also has to be specific. And the same thing is true for psychological skills training. If you find your mind wandering and you're having an issue with concentration, then it doesn't really make sense focusing on skills that relate to depression or anxiety. So just like you see certain principles have application in physical training, most of these carry over very, very well into psychological training. Now, why is psychological skills training important? Well, we've given some reasons of where you may need it. But the truth is, most athletes, coaches, and sports psychologists recognize that performance is a complex interplay of many different factors. There's a level of skill that the athlete will bring, but there's also the environment in which the athlete has to perform. And then there are also personal factors that the athlete has. We would have looked at things like motivation levels and personality. And this means getting to the root cause of why a certain behavior emerges is often difficult. So for example, let's imagine a player experiences anxiety when they're about to take a penalty kick or kick for a field goal in American football, or the follow-up to a try in rugby. Now, you could spend a lot of time trying to understand why they're getting anxious and what might have happened in their past and what might be going on in their current situation. And that is useful. Let me not downplay that. That can be very useful. But sometimes the length of time that it takes to do that, you don't actually have. And within this context, psychological skills training focuses less on the why and getting to the root cause of the behavior, and focuses primarily on modifying the behavior by the acquisition of these psychological skills. So let me repeat that, because that's a very important principle within sports psychology and within psychological skills training. Psychological skills training focuses more on modifying the behavior and trying to use those techniques to eliminate the behavior rather than getting to the root cause of the behavior and understanding why the behavior happens. And there's quite an emerging track of research evidence that shows in certain contexts, psychological skills training does work. So because anything to do with the brain and the mind and psychology is often associated with stigma, especially within the Caribbean region, and also within athletics, which sometimes has a very macho culture around it. What we want to do is we want to debunk some myths and some wrong concepts about psychological skills training. So the first myth that we want to talk about is mental training important for performance and success. Now, some athletes will, or some people say, elite athletes at that level, it's 90% mental and 10% skill. Well, yes or no. I mean, I think many coaches might say it's about 50-50. But rather than focusing on the exact percentage, almost all coaches, almost all athletes, and I'm sure if you're listening to me today, you would agree that there is some level of success that is determined by your psychology. There's some level of success that's determined by your motivation and your attitude. There's some level of success that's determined by your ability to concentrate and your ability not to become anxious. All of these things point to the fact that there's a certain aspect of success in sports performance that is psychological and not simply physical and skills-based. So is mental training then important for success? The answer is yes. But then if you agree that it's important for success, the next question you must ask is, how much time do athletes generally spend training their psychological skills when compared to their physical skills? And for many athletes, especially within the Caribbean region, you find that this is, the balance is skewed and very little attention is given to psychological skills training. And so here we have a little bit of an oxymoron or conundrum. Almost any athlete you ask, any coach will say psychological skills training is important for success. But most of the athletes and most of the coaches don't insist upon that training taking place. And therefore their athletes are not ideally prepared. One very famous athlete that has reached the top of his sport is Novak Djokovic. And he talks about the fact that the thing that allowed him to really reach the pinnacle of his sport and really overcome the other players in his sport that were ahead of him. He plays tennis. And at that time, he was struggling to beat Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, was when he started incorporating psychological skills, and in particular, mindfulness in his training. And in his autobiography, he talks about the fact that he spends approximately 15 minutes a day practicing mindfulness. The other thing we must understand is that you would know in terms of just training in general, it can become monotonous. And so one of the things that psychological skills training does is, in addition to actually developing your psychological skills. It's a nice break from the physical training routine. Now, let me just add here that if you are going to implement a psychological skills training program, the best time to start it is during the off season. So you can actually train and develop a level of competence prior to when you actually start having to perform in competition. Okay, let's go on to another myth or wrong concept. Is PST, psychological skills training, only for people who are mentally weak? Remember I said to you that there's a lot of stigma that surrounds the issue of mental health and the issue of psychological skills, or the issues of talking to a psychologist or therapist or counselor. Well, let me answer this question by asking this another question. Think of any great performer that you know of in any sport. Think about Michael Jordan in basketball, Steph Curry in basketball, LeBron James in basketball. Think about Ronaldo in football, Messi in football. Think about, as we just said, Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer in tennis. Think about Lewis Hamilton in Formula One racing. Think about Tiger Woods in golf. Think about whoever you choose to think about, right? Think about Simone Biles in gymnastics. Think about Usain Bolt and Merlene Otley in track and field, and Fraser in track and field from Jamaica. All of these athletes were very, very skilled. They were not weak when it comes to physical performance, but yet they were training very regularly, several times a week. And the fact that they were training never made you think that they could not run fast or they couldn't shoot the basketball. In fact, because they were training, you felt Michael Jordan would perform well in the tournament. You didn't think he was a weak basketballer because he trained harder than anybody else. You didn't think that was the case for Ronaldo. And so why is it when it comes to psychological skills, we think that if you have to train them, you're weak and it's not macho, it's not strong, it's not athletic. And so that's an important myth to debunk. Most successful athletes actually utilize psychological skills training. And there's just a list of some athletes you can look up. And there's a whole host of athletes and teams that actually utilize this, whole teams. The Seattle Seahawks are well known in American football for their use of psychologists. And almost all top teams in all leagues all around the world now make use of sports psychologists and sports counselors. So no, PST is not for those who are mentally weak. It's actually for those who are mentally strong, because those who are mentally strong are the ones who are successful because they train often. Another myth, PST is a quick fix. Well, you know there are no quick fixes in life. No quick fixes in life. Just like physical training doesn't occur overnight, if you train for a week, you're not going to become an expert and highly skilled. You know, physical training and honing your physical skills can take months and years. And in the same way, PST is not a quick fix. You have to train, you have to work. It has to be part of an overall development strategy that is effectively engaged. So PST is not necessarily going to turn your results around within a week, within 2 weeks. But just like training also, the minute you start to engage it properly, what you'll begin to notice is you'll begin to notice differences. You'll begin to notice improvements. And these improvements might translate to small changes on the court or on the field or in the gym, which might actually start to affect your results. And so how you approach it is very, very important. Recognizing that it's important to start and important to see those small incremental gains, but also recognizing that if you want to see big changes, you have to stick with it and engage in the proper routine that has been developed for you by whoever you're working with. What's another myth? Well, some people think psychological skills training is only for elite performers. Well, think about some of the things that we just spoke about. attitude, motivation, managing anxiety, managing concentration levels. Do you think those things are only important for elite performance? Clearly not. The skills that are actually taught in psychological skills training are actually skills that are important for success in life. They apply for all types of performance, not just athletic performance. They apply for performance on your job, performance when you have to deal with stressful situations in life, performances in music, almost any type of performance, just actually having the ability to negotiate your way through life. And this is especially important when you think about junior athletes, because this is where the foundation for psychological skills can be laid. But very often, because they're junior, we think if we teach them psychological skills, oh, that's not necessary. They're not ready for that. They're not at that level of competition. But think about it. The skills that you learn through psychological skills training don't just have application to sport, but they have application for all of life. And so they can become an invaluable part of that junior athlete's development. Now, this is very important because you know that the vast majority of junior athletes are never going to reach elite level and are never going to earn a living primarily through sport. So the skills that are learned through PST actually become more valuable to them outside of sport and in other career paths and in other aspects of their life as they continue to grow and develop. And our last myth that we want to debunk: mental skills cannot be taught. Mental skills can be taught easily. Often you hear coaches or athletes making these extreme statements. Some say, well, I know they're important, but it's just something you're born with. You can't teach someone mental skills. And then the other thing that happens often is sometimes the coach will just say, focus, concentrate. And they almost expect it's like, if I say it, it'll happen to the athlete. That doesn't make any sense. Let's look at the first one. Mental skills cannot be taught. Well, that's just not true. Like almost any other skill, it can be taught. But like other skills, it will take dedication, it will take practice, and it will take understanding the correct routine. If you don't put those aspects into your training, obviously you're not going to learn the skills. But there is a lot of research, and it's been proved over and over again, that mental skills are something that can be learned. Now, again, the issue of stigma sometimes comes into athletics and sports here, because some people feel you should just figure it out. You're never told that you have to figure out how to kick a football, or figure out how to hit a tennis shot, or figure out how to make a double pike in gymnastics, or whatever those fancy tumbles and jumps that Simone Biles does are called. She's never told that she has to figure it out. Those skills are systematically broken down. Different components are identified. They go through progressions from easy and make them more complex. And there's a whole strategy in which those skills are ramped up and taught. In the same way, that applies to mental skills. Well, what about the idea that mental skills are easily taught? And this is where you get the impression that the coach shouts, concentrate, focus, don't worry about that. But has any coach ever shouting at an athlete? Do you think the way Usain Bolt got faster was by his coach shouting at him, run faster, run faster? Clearly not. Do you think that Mia Hamm, one of the best female footballers, ever got better because the coaches would say to her, you need to pass more, you need to shoot more, you need to shoot in this way, you need to, just by shouting it out, never caused the skill to materialize. There had to be practice. And in the same way, mental skills have to go through a process. If you just tell your child something or your student something, they aren't automatically going to get it. And so there's a balance. Mental skills can be taught, but it's a process. Just like any skill in life is a process. The issue, of course, is when learning a new skill, you have to stay positive and you have to start in a progression and take baby steps first before you try the big steps. Okay, so we've taken some time to explain what is psychological skills training, explain why it's necessary and why it's important, and why we use that approach. We've debunked many of the myths about psychological skills training, and so given you an idea really of what it is and what is involved. What shall we say is the ultimate goal of psychological skills training? Well, remember we put a list up before, and here are a couple more things when you might need psychological skills. What about when you're playing a sport and there's a bad call? You know you've been fouled in the penalty area, but the referee doesn't call it. What about when you've just made a major mistake? You had an opportunity to win that tennis match and you just hit a double fault. What about if you've been training hard in athletics, but for the first 3 races of the season, your rival beats you? What about if you're playing at the opposition's grounds and the crowd is very hostile, making a lot of noise, distracting you? What about just dealing with the pressure that comes from your coach and your parents? All of these are examples of when psychological skills will be necessary. The ultimate goal for an athlete who goes through psychological skills training is captured by the word self-regulation. What you want to do is get to the point where when the athlete faces these complex situations, they're able to regulate their mental functions. They're able to regulate their levels of arousal, regulate their concentration, regulate their response to the crowd, regulate their response to the mistake or the bad call. And so what you want to do is, it's like that old saying, if you want to feed a man, don't give him a fish, teach him how to fish. In the same way, if you want to improve the performance of your athletes, you don't want to just tell them what to do. You want to let them learn how to self-regulate their own mental processes and their own emotions. And so ultimately, in all psychological skills training, what you want is you want your athlete to be in the moment and able to regulate what's going on in their life. In the picture there, you see a famous tennis player, Nick Kyrgios. And he's very controversial because you can tell when he plays, there's very limited self-regulation. He argues with the umpires, he jokes with the crowds, he smashes his rackets. Sometimes he doesn't give enough effort, and it has divided opinion. But one of the things I think everybody is clear about is that he doesn't make a big effort to regulate some of those mental processes in his life. And I guess it works for him to an extent because he is a top 50 player in the world. But most people will tell you, and that's their opinion, that he's not maximizing his talent. And in some ways, people feel he's disrespecting other people around him. So the ultimate goal of all psychological skills training is self-regulation. Now let's just talk a little bit about what are some of the skills that you can learn through psychological skills training. Now, there are many skills, but to try and put it in some kind of categorization, the Ohio Center for Sports Psychology, which has been a leading center for about 30 years, created what's called this performance pyramid for psychological skills. And in it, they list 9 skills that can be taught and that athletes can focus on. And they put them in a scale, an emerging scale of it's good to get these ones first before you move on to these other ones. So level 1 skills or basic skills are the attitude and the motivation of the athlete, their goals and their commitment to the process, and their people skills. How do they interact with the coach, their teammates, other players? Level 2 or preparatory skills are self-talk. What do they say to themselves? And imagery or visualization. And level 3 are considered performance skills, where you learn to manage anxiety, your emotions, and your concentration. And so this is a nice list, and that pyramid is a nice diagram that focuses on many of the things that are taught in psychological skills training. Now this has been adapted and it's not an exhaustive list. You see another pyramid on the right in which 2 additional performance skills have been added: decision making and mental toughness. So this performance pyramid by the Ohio Center is just like a starting point, a nice gauge that gets us on the road and touches on many of the major aspects of psychological skills training that you will focus on. Right. So what would be our process? What would be our approach to psychological skills training? Well, remember I said usually if you want to make progress, you don't want to put the athlete under the pressure of trying to implement something while they're actually in competition. So these things should start in the off season. And PST has 3 phases. Phase 1 is education. Much like what we're doing today, explaining to an athlete what are psychological skills, explaining to an athlete why they're important and how they affect performance. If the athlete doesn't understand these basic foundations, then there's not going to be the necessary buy-in to the training. Think about it again from physical skills. Whatever sport an athlete performs, let's take football. And let's say we have a right-footed player. All right-footed players know that in order to perform at the highest level, you must also develop some level of skill with your left foot. If you don't appreciate that and you don't understand the importance of that, then you won't train your left foot. The same thing applies here. If you don't understand what the psychological skills are and why they're important and how they affect performance, you're not going to see the benefit to the training. So that first phase, education, is critical. The second phase is acquisition, where the athlete is taken through progressions and taught strategies and techniques to improve specific skills. So remember, we just saw 9 skills. So there will be ways to improve motivation, or to improve visualization and mental imagery, or to manage your emotions. And depending on which skill has to be acquired, athletes will be given specific strategies and techniques to develop in that area. And they will have to practice those techniques. And so that's the third phase. Having learned the technique, having learned how to kick the ball, or bowl the ball, or shoot the shot, you now have to practice. Just like good basketballers have to spend, Candace Parker has to spend hours in the gym shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting, and then go through simulations and also put it in place in actual competition. So too, we have to do this in mental skills training. Now, often when you look at these 3 things, education, acquisition, and practice, we think about them as linear, that they follow each other, one after the other, and then it ends. But actually, like all skills, it's a spiral. It's a spiral. Think about any physical skill. You learn about it, you learn the technique, and you practice it. But when you practice, you've discovered something is not quite right, and so you learn some more. And then you acquire new skills to fix that little hitch, and you come back and you practice. And so it's more like an upward spiral of development. And so too, you can think about psychological skills like that. Okay, let me just talk a little bit about reinforcement. Because in learning and in training, we often use the principle of reinforcement in learning skills. And so this can apply to psychological skills, and it can also apply to physical skills. Now, reinforcement is the use of rewards and punishments, or extrinsic motivators. Remember, we spoke about that, to either increase or decrease the likelihood of a response. Okay. The whole idea of reinforcement and the use of these extrinsic modifiers is rooted in something called behavior modification and operant conditioning. Now, operant conditioning originates from experiments that were done many, many years ago, where an animal like a rat is placed in a cage and there's a lever in the cage. And the animal will go around and then by accident it might press the lever, but the lever will release some food to the cage. And so the animal learns that every time it presses the lever, it gets food. And so it starts to press the lever more often. The release of that food when it presses a lever is the reward. And the behavior that gets conditioned is the pressing of the lever. And basically, this is what we're going for when we have reinforcement. We're trying to reinforce a behavior, or we're trying to eradicate or decrease a behavior. And we're doing it by the use of extrinsic motivators, either rewards, which are positive, or punishments, which are negative. One of the leading pioneers in these behavioral approaches to regulating behavior is Skinner. And he said this. He said, students learn without teaching in their natural environments, but teachers arrange special reinforcements that can expedite learning and thus hasten the appearance of that behavior that might be acquired slowly, or making sure of the appearance of the behavior that might otherwise never occur. What's he saying here? He's saying, well, if you just leave somebody to run around on the football field, they're going to probably get better. But if you want to speed up that process, or if you want to develop a skill that they might never acquire, like kicking with their left foot, the use of reinforcers can increase the pace of learning. And so that's part of what we're trying to do with reinforcement. We don't just want to wait on the trial and error method. You play a match, you fail. You play a match, you fail. You play a match, you fail. 1 season goes by, 2 seasons go by. You keep failing. You're improving a little bit, but it's slow. The use of reinforcers during training is designed to speed these things up. Now, as we learned when we looked at the issue of motivation, the use of extrinsic motivators is a complex thing. We know that sometimes it can even reduce intrinsic motivation, which is something we don't want. Some of the things we have to be aware of is people respond differently to reinforcers. Some people respond very positively to reinforcers and they can become big motivators. Others, it doesn't affect it. Sometimes people respond positively one time, but it's not like they can reproduce that behavior all the time. So you use a reinforcer to get somebody to score the penalty. Say, okay, for every penalty that you score, I'm going to give you, just let's use a simple arbitrary thing, $5. And the person scores the first penalty. But just because the reinforcer is there doesn't mean he's going to be able to score the second one if he hasn't been taught the skills. In the same way, you can use a negative reinforcer. For every penalty you miss out, you have to do push-ups. And again, that doesn't mean the person can repeat the behavior at will. And then finally, the value of reinforcers and the use of multiple reinforcers is very, very complex. So reinforcement is something that you have to think about very, very carefully. So let's talk a little bit about effective reinforcement. And to do that, I'm just going to start by playing a little video from Brain Games from National Geographic TV.
A moment ago, we made this volunteer believe she sunk a pair of blindfolded free throws, when earlier, with no blindfold, she missed 10 in a row. How will she do her second time at the line, now that she thinks she nailed those blindfolded buckets?
Oh, close! So close. So close. That's number one. All right. Keep it going. Keep it going. Oh!
She's definitely getting closer, but no baskets yet.
You got this. You got this. You got this. Oh, you.
Wow. By making her think she sank those blindfolded shots, and by cheering and giving her positive reinforcement, it's almost like we hacked her self-confidence and got her to believe more in her natural abilities. In fact, out of 10 shots this time around, she ended up making 4. Quite an improvement. But what if one of our volunteers was already good at basketball? Whoa, this guy's got game. He made a whopping 9 shots from the line. Think there's anything we could do to make him worse?
Okay. So let's have you take one shot. All right? You think you can do it, guys? All right, Josh, let's give it a shot. 3, 2, 1. Not quite, but it's all right. Just let him try a second time. It's a tough one. All right. Wow. Let's give it a shot, Josh. All right. All right. Well, look, the man is blind. Okay. Let's go ahead and take off the blindfold. So listen, it wasn't as easy as we thought. But let's have you do your 10 throws again without the blindfold. Okay. Do your thing. 9 out of 10, maybe 10 out of 10. Okay. Let's see. You guys got his A game on? Come on, Josh. Whoa. All right, Josh. You got this, man. You got this. All right, that's 2.
Remember, this guy made 9 free throws earlier, but now it looks like the crowd's negative reinforcement is throwing him off his game.
A very interesting video. You saw the power of reinforcement and how it affected performance, both positive and negative. It made somebody who seemed that they didn't have much skill get confidence, get focus, and start to do well. And it made somebody negatively on the opposite side, who seemed to have a lot of skill, lose confidence, lose focus. You could see that guy in the video being affected by the crowd and being affected by the negative reinforcement. What do you get from that video? Well, one of the most obvious things is positive reinforcement is much better than negative reinforcement. And therefore, in terms of training, it's generally advocated that you have much more positive reinforcement than negative reinforcement. Now, you know, scientists, they're always trying to quantify things, and this is obviously very difficult to quantify. But generally, one of the things that is suggested is that positive reinforcement should be at least double, and some people say even up to 5 times the ratio of negative reinforcement. The issue behind negative reinforcement is that punishments and criticisms can invoke a fear of failure. Remember, we spoke about that in terms of achievement theory. People are more interested in playing to win or playing because they're afraid of failure. And you don't want people to be afraid of failure. And sometimes that can produce shame, and all of that shame and negativity can hinder the development of the skill. So again, think about the guy taking the penalty during training, and he ends up missing 5 and having to do, say, 20 push-ups. That produces a sense of shame, and next time he goes up, he might be more anxious, and when he's training, he can't focus on what he needs to focus on because he's worried and so on. So that's one of the dangers of negative reinforcement. And so remember what we said, everybody is different, and people respond to reinforcement differently. And so you need to know your athletes, and you need to know how they're going to respond to these positive and negative reinforcers. Now, because negative reinforcers can be so challenging, let me just say a couple of things. You should use them sparingly, not often. And if you do use it, make sure you follow through. And these are actually good tips for parenting if you think about it. When using it, something like punishment, you focus on the behavior, not the person. You focus on the skill in athletics, not the person. So you don't punish the person. What you're saying is you're not acquiring the skill. You seek to explain the behavior that needs to change. And you can actually get the athletes involved, give them some level of autonomy. Remember, that's a key aspect of motivation. By prior to the session or prior to the season or whatever, let them understand, you come up and you help us design what are the punishments for breaking the rules. In seeking to apply negative reinforcers, try not to let anger and negative emotion from you invade the space. Simply be very matter of fact and make it almost contractual. One of the issues is the issue of consistency. Do some people get away with things that others don't get away with? This is a very interesting topic when you talk about team sports, where you have superstars. And that can be very debilitating to team culture. That's something to think about. And then sometimes people like attention. And so the negative punishment is that it brings attention to them. And that then can sometimes be a reward. And so it's not achieving what you want. So you realize human beings are very complex, and how we use reinforcers requires real skill about the situation and about the particular athlete. There you see that merging that we've talked about a lot, where you have the situation merging with the particular psychology of the athlete. Here's some guiding principles that have been put forward by a US Olympic Committee about thinking about mental training and psychological skills training. Number one, mental skills training can't replace physical skills training. You can't just train your mind and not your body and then expect to do well. So always remember that, don't think just because you're doing psychological skills, you can abandon the physical skills. However, what we've said, and we repeat, that physical skills are often not enough to succeed consistently. You might succeed once, but you do need those mental skills to be consistently successful. And if we combine these two things, we can say that a strong mind might not win an Olympic medal, but a weak mind will definitely make you lose one. Now, that's an important consideration. Just because you're very strong mentally, if your physical skills are weak, you're probably not going to win that Olympic medal. But on the converse, if you're very skilled, an excellent athlete, you're well prepared in terms of your physical skills, but your mind is weak, that lack of training in that one area might then be the biggest impediment to you actually achieving your goals. Another thing that has been discovered is coaches often think they know what their athletes are thinking, but they're usually wrong. And this is important to appreciate, that very often, because of the issues around psychological skills and they're not discussed enough, and the mental aspect of games are not discussed, coaches make assumptions, and we need to remove that. Thoughts do affect behavior, and behavior affects performance. So once you understand that, you're going to understand the importance of psychological skills training. Consistency of thinking will affect consistency of behavior. If you can keep your mind stable, then you can get stable responses all the time. So understanding this helps coaches and athletes. Coaches tend to have a certain view about mental errors. They can be harsh, or they can be dismissive. They'll work for years and years trying to hone a physical skill, but they often don't spend enough time focusing on the mental skill. And it's very important for the coach to be involved in mental skills training, because again, an athlete fails because of anxiety. Their stroke is no longer working. They don't make the passes. They're giving away the ball. But the issue is not the skill. Learning the skill up to another level might not be what's required. What really is required is how to manage the anxiety. Sometimes it's okay to force athletes to do mental training. Just like sometimes an athlete turns up at training. They don't want to do the physical training, but the coach forces them. The same thing applies with the mental skills. Just it might be a little harder to do, but it's also applicable. Number 9, like other skills, we want to try and find measures that apply to mental skills training. That's very, very useful if you can have measures. And then finally, we've been focusing on athletes, but the coaches also need to think about their mental skills training and how they can benefit, because they often have to deal with many of the same issues that the athletes have to do. So these are just some guidelines that have been put out for coaches and athletes by the US Olympic Association. Okay, I just want to end by mentioning something about mental toughness. Now, mental toughness is a phrase and a construct that's become increasingly popular within the realm of sports psychology. And some people could even argue that the aim of all psychological skills training is to produce mental toughness. Your textbooks will tell you self-regulation. So for the exam, put that. But this new concept of mental toughness really is an outcome of psychological skills training. And mental toughness is defined as an ability of athletes to outperform their competitors in managing and demonstrating consistency, drive, focus, confidence, and control. But the key thing is that phrase at the end, under pressure. So all of those things that are required to perform, consistency, drive, focus, attention, confidence, managing emotions, can you do those things under pressure? If you can do them under pressure, that's called mental toughness. Now, if you realize that's what we've been talking about throughout this session, when the crowd is making a lot of noise, when your parents are looking on, when it's the big moments, when you have an ability to win the championship, all of those are examples of pressure. A simple definition is the capability of a person to consistently perform their best in spite of the clutter and chaos that everyday life throws at us. And I like that definition because sports is like that. Sports is a mishmash of all kinds of things. You don't know what you're going to get when you turn up on the day of the match or the game. The weather could be different. The opponent could be different. Somebody could be injured. Your team could be different. The way you feel could be different. What's in your mind could be different. There's clutter and chaos everywhere. And the ability to perform in spite of that and to manage yourself in spite of that is mental toughness. Here's another definition. The ability to face adversity, failure, and negative events without a lot of effort, attitude, and enthusiasm. Everyone is enthusiastic when things go well, but a person who is mentally tough, they manage it when things aren't going well. And I think that's important because mental toughness talks about that issue then of self-regulation. You control your mental toughness. That last statement basically brings it back to the whole issue of self-regulation. Let's look at a little video about a very difficult situation that an athlete talks about and then highlights mental toughness as being key.
Some people say you have to be broken to be fixed again. My name is Asha Phillip, and I run. Athletics for me was just a bit of fun. It was something different, it was something new. Trampolining was my main sport, and I loved it. And then I fell into double mini trampolining, and then I became a world junior champion that year. I was at the World Championships in Quebec. I bounced up, but when I came down, I didn't land right. I could just hear the crunch. I could just see my leg pointing in a different direction. And I just remember grabbing my leg and then just screaming and screaming. There was nothing holding my legs together. In a heartbeat, everything was just gone. Everything I worked hard for had vanished. Everyone told me I was a write-off. So how was a child at age of 17 get back up? It felt like I lost something. I lost a part of me. I wanted to give up. And when you're at the point of just giving up, that's when you're meant to really turn your life around and change. It was my mom who believed in me. And for that, I believed in her. I really did question how I'm going to get out. It was little by little coming in to do the rehab. Step by step, you started to see improvement. The crutches went away, then I could walk. I was able to jog and then run. But then I had loads of injuries along the way. The only thing standing between success and failure is mental toughness. It's about being resilient. Being an athlete isn't like a normal job. The gym, strengthening, the mind work, the fitness for one shot for 11 seconds. There are a lot of knockbacks, a lot. It's how you handle it. But it's also the most amazing release. I let out all my stresses, all my bad energy. Every time I show up to train, I have the opportunity to learn more about myself and how to run correctly. Some people train brilliantly, but in a race, they don't win. You need focus. You're in an arena of thousands of people, and you're on the start line with 7 other women, and you have a man holding a gun, and you have to learn to channel all this, not panic. And there's so much going on with your family in the crowd, from screaming, wanting you to do well, to the screaming for the girls beside you. How do you pull it all aside and say, okay, I have to focus on myself, focus on my lane, focus on me. There are sacrifices. There are lots of ways to have fun. Go after your goals and balance it out the right way. In the end, it's about knowing what's important to you and what makes you thrive. That's not just athletics, that's life.
That's a nice little video that encapsulates many of the things that we've been saying about mental toughness, but also about psychological skills training. And there was a key word that was mentioned there, resilience. That's a word that's gaining traction, not just in sports psychology, but in psychology in general, as human beings have to confront the different stressors of life. Real stressors like injuries and a crowd and overcoming difficult circumstances. Mental toughness allows you to do that. Well, there are many models of mental toughness, and one of the first models is the 4Cs model. It defines mental toughness as 4 things: control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. That if you're mentally tough, you have control, you're committed, you rise to the challenges, and you're confident. Each C has 2 components. In control, it talks about managing emotions and also believing you can do it. You know, some people, they don't have that confidence. They don't think they can do it. They don't think they control life. That's the whole concept in psychology that has to do with locus control. Locus of control, sorry. Some people have an external locus of control. They think when things happen, it's due to external events. Other people have an internal locus of control. They think they control the things around them. People who are successful and mentally tough, they believe that they control things and they manage their emotions. The second C is commitment. Commitment is goal setting. It's setting goals and moving to achieve them and working on the goals. So it's not just setting the goals, it's working on the goals and achieving the goals. And achieving the goals means you will pay the price to achieve the goals. Now that's important. Achieving the goals means you will pay the price to achieve the goals. So some people write down their goals, and that's very important. You actually have to write them down. You have to have goals. Some people actually work on the goals, but when they get opposition, they back off. There's always an excuse. The people who are mentally tough, they find a way to continue to focus on their goals. The third thing is confidence. People who are mentally tough, they believe in their abilities, they trust their abilities, or they're convinced they can learn new abilities. Because I play tennis, I guess a lot of my examples come from tennis. But again, going back to Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal, in order to compete with Roger Federer, they learned new skills. They improved their service. Novak Djokovic, as we said, developed psychological skills. He believed that he could do these things. And persons with confidence also think they can influence others as much as others can influence them. And finally, challenge. People who are mentally tough, they're willing to take risks and push themselves. They're driven to succeed. They don't mind failure. Let me say that again. They don't mind failure. Persons who are mentally tough, they can bounce back from defeat or bounce back from a mistake, and they're willing to challenge themselves. That's very different from people who are afraid of failure and don't want to bounce back. And therefore, people who are mentally tough, they can learn from experience. They see negative situations as an opportunity for growth and development. And so as we start our journey along psychological skills training, I want to encourage you to do some reading and some understanding of mental toughness as a component of psychological skills as we go forward. Okay, so that brings us to today, the end of today's session. In today's session, we introduce you to the term psychological skills training and basically just focus on the word skills training. Any skills training is a process. It requires the right attitude. It requires motivation. It requires determination. In psychological skills training, what we're focused on is mental skills, as opposed to the physical skills that most of us are used to training. But you know, if you think about it, all of us have been to school, and school is a great example of psychological skills training as well, where you put yourself through a process. So as always, I hope this has been useful and beneficial to you. You can listen to it over and over again. You can play it at double speed. Until we meet again next time, take care and keep well.